The rain came down in cold, relentless sheets, turning the manicured lawns of the Columbus, Ohio suburb into a dark, shimmering mirror. It was a place of quiet wealth and unspoken rules, where perfect houses sat behind wrought-iron gates, their windows glowing with a warm, curated light. One house in particular, a triumph of modern architecture with clean lines and vast panes of glass, seemed to radiate a life of impeccable order. Inside, a family was preserved, its rigid morality and social standing protected from the storm. But outside, on the slick, unforgiving concrete of the front porch, the illusion was shattered. The cold didn't just come from the rain, it seeped from the very foundation of the home, a stark and brutal contrast between the manufactured comfort within and the raw, desolate abandonment left to weather the storm alone. Standing there, drenched and trembling, was Hannah Miller. Just that morning, she had walked out of this very house as a 17-year-old model daughter, her future neatly mapped out on a pre-law track, her life a testament to her family's stability. Now, her carefully chosen school clothes were soaked through, clinging to her like a second skin, a pathetic reminder of an identity that had been violently stripped from her in the space of a single conversation. Her hair, usually styled, was plastered to her face, and the rain washed away tears she no longer had the energy to wipe away. In her eyes, once bright with the easy confidence of a girl who had never known hardship, was a harrowing mix of disbelief, raw panic, and the first terrifying flicker of a resolve she never knew she possessed. The argument itself had been a blur of clipped, wounding words, but the final act was brutally clear. Her father's voice, devoid of any warmth, had delivered the verdict, and her mother's silence had been its own form of condemnation. Then came the sound that would echo in her mind for years to come. It wasn't a slam, but a quiet, deliberate swing of the heavy oak door, a sound of calm, calculated finality. It was followed by a sharp, metallic click that cut through the drumming of the rain. The deadbolt, a simple mechanism of brass and steel, but in that moment it was a guillotine, severing her from everything she had ever known. It wasn't just a lock on a door, it was a lock on her childhood, on her identity as a daughter, on the conditional love she had worked her entire life to earn. She remained frozen on the porch for a long time after, the sound of the lock replaying in her mind, each click a fresh wave of shock. The warm light from the living room window spilled onto the porch, illuminating the rain that mingled with her tears, yet it offered no warmth, serving only as a painful reminder of the world she was now barred from. In that moment of profound isolation, her entire universe had shrunk to a cold, wet backpack and the tiny, unseen life growing within her. It was a moment designed to crush a person, to extinguish all hope. When you witness a story of such profound injustice, it stays with you. Sharing these journeys is so important, and if you feel the same, subscribing to the channel allows us to continue bringing them forward, showing how the most devastating endings can become new beginnings. The rain had stopped by dawn, but the cold had settled deep into Hannah's bones. She wandered through the awakening city, a ghost haunting the edges of other people's lives. The world seemed to move on with a brutal indifference, commuters rushing past with coffee in hand, their faces set with the purpose of a new day. She ended up at the Greyhound station, a place of transition and anonymity, where no one looked at her twice. The sterile, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the rows of hard plastic chairs. She clutched her backpack to her chest, the thin fabric a poor substitute for the comfort of home. It wasn't just a building she'd been locked out of, it was her entire life. And the weight of that realization was a physical ache, a hollowness that no amount of warmth could fill. She spent that first night huddled in a corner, trying to make herself invisible. The station was a cacophony of disembodied voices from the intercom, the squeal of bus brakes, and the restless shuffling of people going somewhere, anywhere but here. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the click of the deadbolt, a sound that had become the punctuation mark at the end of her childhood. Instinctively, her hand went to her stomach, a silent promise to the tiny, unknowing life inside her. This baby was the reason for her exile, but it was also the only thing tethering her to the world. In the profound loneliness of that bus station, surrounded by strangers, she understood that her body was no longer just her own. It was a sanctuary, and she had to protect it. Her exhausted mind drifted back to a different time, a memory that now felt like a scene from someone else's life. It was a family dinner just a few months prior, the dining room table gleaming under the crystal chandelier. Her father, a man who measured love in achievements, was outlining her path to law school as if it were a corporate merger. Her mother smiled, a placid, approving expression she reserved for moments of perfect compliance. They spoke of legacy, of reputation, of the future they had designed for her. Even then, amidst the scent of roast chicken and her mother's perfume, she had felt a subtle sense of suffocation, a quiet dread that their love was a meticulously constructed edifice that could crumble at the slightest imperfection. She now knew she had been right. Then came the more recent, sharper memory of Ryan. They were parked in his car at their favorite spot, a bluff overlooking the city lights. When she told him, her voice trembling, his face didn't register shock or concern, but a cold, pragmatic annoyance. He didn't ask about her, about them, about a potential future. He talked about his football scholarship, his parents' expectations, the disruption this would cause to his carefully planned life. The word abortion left his lips so easily, a simple solution to a complex problem he wanted no part of. His rejection wasn't violent or loud. It was a quiet, surgical removal of her from his life, leaving a wound far deeper than any angry words could have. He had chosen his future, and it didn't include her or their child. As morning light streamed through the grimy windows of the station, a gnawing hunger brought her crashing back to the present. It was a primal, desperate feeling she had only ever read about. The shame was a physical cloak, heavy and suffocating. She watched people buy tickets, grab breakfast from the vending machines, and greet loved ones. Each normal interaction, a painful reminder of the world she had lost. The voices of her parents echoed in her head, their disappointment a crushing weight. For a terrifying moment, she felt the pull of despair, the urge to simply give up, to let the current of her misfortune carry her away. She was nothing, she had nothing. But then, a faint, stubborn flicker of defiance sparked within her, a refusal to let their judgment be the final word on her life. She pushed herself to her feet and walked, with no destination in mind, just a need to escape the stale air of the station. Her feet led her through unfamiliar streets until a small, inviting glow caught her eye. It was a diner, Rose's Place, its windows fogged with warmth. The scent of coffee and frying bacon wafted out, a powerful lure to her empty stomach and frozen limbs. Hesitantly, she approached the door, catching a glimpse of her reflection in the glass. The girl, staring back, was a stranger, her face pale and streaked with dirt, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed to have aged her overnight. Taking a shaky breath that felt like her last ounce of courage, she pushed the door open, a small bell announcing her arrival with a gentle, hopeful chime. The diner was a haven of warmth and the low, comforting murmur of conversation. Behind the counter, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a dusting of flour on her apron looked up. Her name, Hannah would learn, was Rose. She saw Hannah standing there, drenched in misery, and her gaze held no judgment, only a deep, quiet understanding. She didn't ask any questions. She simply gestured with her head toward an empty booth in the corner. A few moments later, a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and a steaming mug of hot chocolate appeared before Hannah. "You look like you need this more than my other customers," Rose said, her voice soft but steady. "Eat up. It's on the house." That simple, unexpected act of kindness was the key that unlocked all the pain Hannah had been holding inside. It wasn't the cruelty or the abandonment that finally broke her. It was this small gesture of grace from a complete stranger. A sob tore through her, raw and convulsive, and then the tears came. A hot, cleansing flood of grief, fear, and a gratitude so profound it hurt. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Rose quietly slid into the booth across from her, placing a warm, steady hand on her arm. She didn't say a word, didn't offer platitudes or advice. She just sat there, a silent, solid presence in the storm, letting Hannah know that for this one moment, she wasn't alone. As the storm of tears subsided, the story began to pour out of Hannah. The words tumbling over each other in a rush of pain and confusion. She told Rose everything: the positive pregnancy test, Ryan's cold dismissal, her parents' rigid verdict, the final, deafening click of the deadbolt. She spoke to this stranger with a desperate, unfiltered honesty, because Rose's quiet presence made her feel seen for the first time in days. Rose listened patiently, her expression never wavering from one of deep, compassionate empathy. When one person dares to share their deepest wound, it creates a space for healing. It's stories like these that remind us of our shared humanity, and subscribing is what allows us to keep sharing them, building a community around the power of listening. When Hannah's voice finally fell to a raw whisper, Rose gently squeezed her arm. She didn't offer pity. Instead, she offered a piece of herself. She spoke of her husband, lost to a heart attack decades ago, and the lonely, terrifying struggle to keep the diner from going under while raising her son. She talked about the whispers and the pity from her own community, and the strength she had to find within herself when it felt like there was none left. She wasn't comparing their pain. She was connecting it, showing Hannah that the road of hardship had been walked by others, and that survival wasn't just a possibility, but a certainty if you refused to stop walking. Rose looked at Hannah, her gaze clear and direct. She saw past the tear-stained face and the worn-out clothes to the terrified but resilient young woman underneath. She saw a mother, fierce and protective, who just didn't know it yet. "I have a small room upstairs," Rose said, her tone practical, leaving no room for argument. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. You can stay as long as you need. When you feel up to it, you can help me out here in the diner. We'll take it one day at a time." The offer was a lifeline, thrown so simply and with such conviction that it felt less like charity and more like a shared battle plan. Hannah stared at the woman across from her, then down at her hands, which were protectively cradling her stomach. In Rose's simple offer, she saw a future. It wasn't the future her parents had planned, but it was a future nonetheless. One she could build herself. The crippling fear that had paralyzed her since she was left on that porch began to recede, replaced by a fragile but fierce flicker of hope. For the first time, she felt a sense of agency. She was no longer just the girl who was cast out. She was a woman with a choice. Looking up, she met Rose's gaze, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt a glimmer of her own strength. "Okay," she whispered, the single word sealing her decision. The fight had begun. 8 months had passed, each one a small lifetime of change. The diner had become Hannah's entire world, a universe of clattering plates, the scent of coffee, and the steady, quiet rhythm of work. Her son, Leo, was 3 months old, a perfect tiny being who spent his days sleeping in a bassinet in the kitchen or nestled in a sling against his mother's chest. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, as Hannah wiped down the counter with Leo cooing softly against her, the bell above the door chimed. 2 figures stood there, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, their expensive clothes and rigid posture looking utterly alien amidst the worn vinyl booths. It was her parents. Her father's face was a mask of cold disapproval, and her mother's held a strained, practiced sorrow. The low hum of the diner seemed to vanish, and for a heart-stopping moment, Hannah was 17 again, standing alone in the rain. Her mother approached the counter slowly, her eyes avoiding the baby and scanning the humble diner with a look of profound distaste. She didn't ask how Hannah was. She began to speak in a low, controlled voice, the kind she used for difficult business calls, full of false sympathy and sharp edges. She spoke of their concern, of the family's reputation, and of the difficult position Hannah had put them in. Then came the offer, wrapped in the language of forgiveness. They would welcome her home, help her get back on track with her life, and pretend this unfortunate chapter had never happened. There was only one condition. The baby would have to be given up for adoption, placed with a structured family that could provide him with a proper life, a life they felt Hannah was incapable of giving. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Hannah felt a familiar, cold dread creep up her spine, the old instinct to please them, to accept their terms just to end the crushing weight of their disapproval. She looked down at Leo, whose tiny hand was curled around her finger, his eyes blinking up at her with absolute trust. She then glanced toward the kitchen, where Rose stood watching, her expression a silent wall of support. In that instant, something inside Hannah shifted, the fear that had dictated her entire life. The desperate need for their validation simply dissolved. It was like waking from a long dream. She was no longer their broken, disobedient daughter. She was Leo's mother, and her only duty was to the small, warm life she held in her arms. She lifted her head, and when she met her parents' gaze, her eyes were clear and steady. The trembling girl from the front porch was gone forever. "My family is right here," she said, her voice quiet, but ringing with a strength she never knew she possessed. She adjusted Leo in her arms, holding him closer. "It's my son, and it's the woman who gave me a home when you gave me the street." She looked directly at her mother, the years of pain and longing for approval finally falling away. "I don't need your forgiveness, because I didn't do anything wrong. I chose love, unconditional love, something you never understood. Seeing someone find their voice after being silenced for so long is a powerful thing. When you subscribe, you help us continue to share these moments of courage, reminding us all of the strength that lies within." Her parents stood in stunned silence, their carefully constructed plan shattered by her simple, unwavering refusal. It was a language they didn't comprehend. There was no argument, no plea, just a statement of a reality they could no longer control. Her mother's face crumpled, not with sadness, but with the frustration of defeat. Her father simply turned, his jaw tight, and walked out the door without a backward glance. Her mother followed, casting one last, bewildered look at the daughter she no longer recognized. The bell chimed softly, marking their final exit. Hannah didn't watch them go. She looked down at her son, tracing the soft curve of his cheek. The air in the diner felt clean and new. Rose emerged from the kitchen and placed a warm hand on Hannah's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the battle won. The victory wasn't loud, but it was absolute. The silence that followed their departure was more comforting than any words could have been. Hannah looked down at Leo, who had slept through the entire confrontation, his small chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. A wave of love so fierce and protective washed over her that it took her breath away. Rose came from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron, and wrapped an arm around Hannah's shoulders. She didn't offer praise or platitudes, only a silent, solid squeeze that said everything. This was her family. This small, worn diner was her home. It wasn't a life built on prestige or parental approval, but on something far more real and enduring. The simple, unconditional love she had fought for, and the profound kindness she had been given when she needed it most. The battle was over, and in the quiet aftermath, there was only peace. 5 years later, the diner was still the heart of their world, but their world had grown. Hannah, with a resilience that amazed everyone but Rose, had earned her GED and then a degree in social work from the local university, attending night classes while Rose looked after a bright energetic Leo. The boy, now a whirlwind of laughter and questions, knew nothing of the cold rain or the locked door from his mother's past. His life was one of warmth, security, and the unwavering love of his mom and his Nana Rose, who spoiled him with pancakes and stories. Hannah was no longer defined by the family that had cast her out, but by the one she had built. She had transformed the deepest wound of her life into her greatest source of strength, proving that a future could be forged from hope even when it began in despair. Her own journey had ignited a fire within her. With a small loan co-signed by Rose and a flood of donations from a community that had watched her grow, Hannah opened a small support center for teen mothers in the vacant storefront right next to the diner. She named it The Haven. It was a warm, inviting space filled with donated cribs, a small library, and the constant, comforting aroma of coffee from next door. It became a sanctuary for young women who, like her, had found themselves alone and terrified. Hannah provided counseling, resources, and most importantly, the non-judgmental empathy of someone who truly understood. She had turned her personal pain into a public promise. No one who came to her door would ever have to feel as lost as she once had. One crisp autumn afternoon, a car pulled up and a young woman, no older than Hannah had been, stepped out and stood hesitating on the sidewalk. She clutched her stomach, her face a portrait of raw fear. Hannah watched from the doorway of the Haven, her heart filled not with pity, but with a deep, knowing compassion. She walked out and approached the girl gently, seeing her own reflection in those terrified eyes. She stopped a few feet away, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Come on in," Hannah said, her voice a calm anchor in the girl's turbulent sea. "You're safe here." Witnessing a journey like Hannah's reminds us that every act of kindness can create a legacy of its own. By subscribing, you become part of that legacy, helping us continue to share stories that prove hope can be found in the most unexpected places.